Hey guys, it's Brad from probateHouseGuy.com. Today I want to talk about investor-friendly closing attorneys or title agencies and why, when you're doing investment real estate, it is probably the most important asset of someone you should have on your team. So today I'm here with Josh Rand. Josh Rand has been my closing attorney here in Georgia for the deals that I do in Georgia for a number of years. And I was referred to Josh a long time ago. When I first got started, I was closing my deals with a guy just right up the road from here, but he was more of a, let's call him a traditional attorney. Great guy, but when it came to some of the crazy complicated deals and deal structure and probates and all the things that I deal with, he just really wasn't the right fit. So I was referred to Josh many, many years ago by my broker at the time that I had my license with. So I've been closing with Josh and his team ever since then. And so Josh, can you elaborate why you would consider yourself an investor-friendly
Sure.
closing attorney?
Well, let's talk about what does an investor-friendly closing firm mean?
Yeah.
And I think what Brad's getting at is in the state of Georgia, which I'm licensed here in Georgia, so this is limited to Georgia, but the closing attorneys, I think, as well as any skill, they vary greatly between the services that they can provide or the skill level that they have. And I think that not to cut any of the closing attorneys down, but sometimes agents or people have a view of us that all we do is basically watch people sign papers, and that's very far from the truth. But I think that to the extent that we as attorneys want to get involved in different problems or help solve different problems, can dictate, our skill level or the deals that we get into, whether it just be like a straightforward seller to a buyer retail situation, or what Brad's saying is investors. Investor deals can be creative. They can be assignments, double closings, contracts for deed,
Subject to and seller
financing, all of these different aspects. So we just have taken it upon ourselves over the years to be a service-oriented, provide those types of services for our clientele. And that's important. It's vital to helping make sure that the deal, or that you're dealing with an escrow company or a title agency or attorney who understands that. Because, for example, in a double closing, we have to be very careful in how we treat the information. We don't want the seller necessarily understanding that, hey, the property is being sold a secondary time, and we don't maybe want the buyer to understand that, so that they start looking at it. One of the things that you guys are concerned about as wholesalers and investors is if you are flipping a property, and you're entitled, you guys work hard and you spend a lot of money in your marketing and finding deals, you're making money. And sometimes people don't understand that if they just see a bottom line. So that's one aspect of I think what sets us apart is we're sensitive to that. And one of our protocols, for example, if you're wholesaling a deal, if there is an issue that requires a certain amount of communication or exposing a particular issue, we might say, hey, Brad, this is the problem. Either A, you can go back and talk to these people, or here's how we would approach it. How do you want to handle it? So we work in concert with you, and not just take certain liberties, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, just having that knowledge. For example, we talked in some other videos about hard money lending and how lenders are secured. That's very important. Not every attorney is willing to do loan documents or make sure things like that.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned about lenders and that sort of thing, and I want to touch on something because it pertains here in Georgia, but when it comes to double closing, some states double closings are not allowed, or in many cases, if you're doing what's called dry funding, if there's a lender involved, you have a duty as the attorney to notify that lender that that's happening.
So this is something that I think all investors need to know this term. It's called pass-through funding. And if you have a deal that might be a double closing, or in some cases triple closings, pass-through funding would mean that you're using the funds from the end buyer to go ahead and fund the deals, prior that are kind of going in the chain. Some attorneys or some title companies will allow that. Some will not. And so it's important to understand, and you also have to know that some states don't allow that.
Correct.
And so that's very important, because you have to know and be ready to fund your deal to make sure that if you're doing a double closing, I have to fund it so that I can turn around and sell it. And again, what Brad mentioned is she's touching on mortgage fraud. So if me as a title agent and closing attorney use a lender's money to fund an unrelated deal, that's a big no-no. Now, many hard money lenders understand what's going on in investors, and they might be completely fine with that, but it does require us to get approval from those attorneys. So for pass-through funding is allowed unless it's not. The situations might be there's a lender involved, or states don't allow that, or again, some escrow companies or title agents or attorneys don't do that as a practice.
Or even hedge funds, which I've sold a lot of properties as hedge funds over the years, although really since July of 22, a lot of the hedge funds kind of stopped buying properties. They're still kind of buying, but not really. A lot of hedge funds will not allow pass-through funding, and you have to get your own funding. So there are ways around this. You just get transactional funding. You either get a lender. I have a friend of mine, if you'd like a referral, he does transactional funding in all 50 states across the country. If you need a transactional fund your double close, I can get you in touch with him. Josh has done some transactional funding for some people. Yeah. Obviously, when you're doing the closing, you have to kind of, touch that with kid gloves, right? But sometimes you will need to use transactional funding. Sometimes you can use pass-through funding if you're doing a double close. Obviously, let's elaborate on assignments a little bit. That's probably the most common wholesaling method, although I don't really assign things anymore. I don't like to assign, but there are some people that I know that's all they do. And one person you and I know does it pretty much on all of his deals, and he does a lot of volume, right? Yeah. So let's talk about assignments and maybe what you should look out for in that, right?
Sure. So keep in mind, this is a concept that we talk about in contract law that takes even would-be attorneys some time to understand. But an assignment basically is as it sounds, you're assigning your rights in a contract. So you've gone and you've talked to a seller, you've successfully gotten it under contract. And rather than you close it and turn around and do a double closing, what you want to do is you're going to bring in the end buyer. And now we're going to have a closing directly from seller to this new buyer. Some of the mistakes that I think some wholesalers make with assignments and even some people that are purchasing assignments, is keep in mind, you're buying the underlying contract. And I've seen these one-page flimsy little assignment contracts, and the people who are the contract is being assigned to don't even
get a copy of the original contract.
This is what they're buying. Now, this is wholesalers, they are concerned about giving that information because they don't want to expose their sale price. So, for example, one of the things that we see is certainly there's a differential in the sale price. There might be a differential in earnest money. So what you could do is you can, strike the sale price and basically say your price is this and my money is the difference between your price and my contract price. Same thing with earnest money. How do you handle earnest money rules? So usually what happens in an assignment is you're going to ask your assignee to put up more earnest money than you were required to. And so you also want that difference. So it has to be spelled out and clear, as to what happens in the event of default and upon whose default. The other thing is it's important to spell out in these contracts or assignments, like what does happen when something doesn't happen. If for example, somebody's required to put up earnest money and they don't, people might assume, well, the contract's invalid. I don't know if you can make that conclusion or not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So maybe you could be more specific, and that's a good point of saying, okay, if you fail to deposit earnest money within, 48 hours, this contract shall automatically become void. It might be one way, or I can notify you and you have 48 hours to go ahead and remedy that breach. Otherwise it's void. But if it's just left silent, now you're sort of out there in the wind, and that could be a factual dispute that might give rise to a claim later. If you say, I'm not selling to you, I'm going to sell to somebody else, and somebody digs their heels in the sand and says, hey, no, I have a contract right now, or contract rights. So language when it comes to contracts or assignments. Double closes, I'd want to touch on something as well. So you're contracting to sell a property that you haven't acquired yet. You could be in breach. What if your seller doesn't sell it to you? So this is an example of where language can be vital or very important, because maybe a simple sentence or some kind of term in your secondary closing when you're selling it, this is, hey, I might not own this property at the time that we're contracting, and if for some reason I'm not able to acquire it, then I can go ahead and terminate this contract, or I can excuse my obligation to perform under this contract. Because what happens if you don't have that and you can't sell it? Well, you might be liable for breach. So those are some things to think about. I think this is why we're an investor-friendly firm, because we do understand these issues, and from the perspective of an investor, and we certainly
yeah. So Josh, I want to also talk about, obviously I'm the probate house guy, right? So I do a lot of probate and inheritance deals, right? And the reason why I use Josh's firm here in Georgia is because Josh is, while you're not a probate attorney technically, Josh is extremely knowledgeable in the world of probate estates and heirship and all that. So I use him because he's been able to unravel and make sense of a lot of complicated estates. A lot of these, I call them closing factories. There's a lot of attorney outfits out there that do a lot of volume, mostly for a lot of real estate agents. Usually those firms are hiring kind of junior attorneys fresh out of college to be their closing attorney. And a lot of those guys aren't as knowledgeable and don't have the experience in the world like you do. And the reason I come to you is because you can solve those problems and you can navigate them. And really, I think there's only been maybe one or two deals ever where you've said, no, it's not worth your time, right? But for the most part, you get the job done. You get the deal to the closing table, and that's why I use you. Also, let's touch on creative deals.
I just want to thank you for that. I mean,
Sure.
the acknowledgement.
Yeah.
We have been doing this for a long time.
We have. So let's touch on the creative deals here. We talked about subject to seller, finance, contract for deed, even lease options, right? Those are some of the ways you might acquire from a creative standpoint. Josh, you have experience in them yourself. You're an investor. Most people don't realize Josh is an investor himself. He owns a whole portfolio of rental properties. You flip properties. You do creative deals. You do all the things. So not only are you an attorney, but you understand how this whole world works on your own, right? So creative deals. I've done a few over the years. I've even introduced you to some creative deals that actually, hey, this is how you do this deal. And then you took it a little bit further and said, okay, let me look at the law books and figure out how we do this, right? So let's talk about creative deals a little bit and why, an investor-friendly firm might be better equipped to deal with those than not.
Sure. This in the world of investor and investor-friendly closing attorney, I mean, that's going to be, we can't spend all day talking about it. I think it just relates back to being aware of those issues. And I think what you touched on too, I certainly can't ask for a better endorsement. I've had people who have ultimately come to, me, because I do take the time, and my staff, we take the time to go ahead and fix problems to get you to a closing table. I'm familiar with firms that when they encounter a probate or an issue, they've handed that back to the investor or handed that back to the seller or buyer and said, go and get this cleaned up and then bring it back to us. Well, there's a reason why you do what you do and why we do what we do. Back to your question, language in the contract is going to prevent so many future issues from coming up in making sure that you properly document what your deal is in a subject to. For example, I'm taking over your property subject to, meaning I am not paying off your mortgage. Well, do you go in and do you talk about how long am I going to maintain your mortgage? Do I put a time limit on it? Is it indefinite? Do I get to keep your mortgage for the remaining balance of the term of your mortgage? Do you understand that this could affect you and your credit when you go to purchase a property in the future? So properly just sort of laying out what it is that you're trying to do, even in layman's terms, and just so everybody's on the same page. That's kind of the approach that we take is making sure that people have the information that they need. We as we earlier talked about, we don't overexpose that to the extent that I don't know how to say.
Well, I want to elaborate on what you said too. Like one of the things I like about your firm, and this is just because this is sort of my conscience, and you're like a genuine good guy and you want to do the right thing. There are some attorneys out there who are not the most honest people, right? You know, I get that bad rap. But one of the things when I do creative deals, I like to be very transparent the way I run my company, and I try to do all things on the up and up. Even that when it comes to creative deals, I want to make sure that the seller I'm dealing with is fully aware and I've disclosed all of the things. Plus, I'm a licensed agent, so like I'm held to a higher standard than everyone else. So I have to make sure that what I'm doing is on the up and up because my real estate license is on the line, right? So one of the things Josh's firm does here is they, and some investors might not like this, but you make sure that the seller understands what they're getting into and signs certain disclosures and affidavits and acknowledgments that you understand that this mortgage is, you know, getting taken over, or you understand all these things. I've done wraparound mortgage deals, and you made sure that both the underlying lender understood that this was being wrapped and that the end buyer understood this was being wrapped, and you had remedies in the contract in the event that something doesn't get paid, what happens. And Josh is very thorough and detailed about these things. And I think that's critical if you're an investor and you're going to be doing this long term, inevitably deals are going to go south. It's going to happen. Things happen in life. And the better you protect yourself and the more language you have and the more you think about these things, and if you have a good attorney on your side that actually understands this, the better off you're going to be in the future. Because when these types of disputes arise, the more you have in writing, the better, because you can go back to that document and say, well, this is what the document says.
Yeah.
Boom.
Well, and I just want to clarify, I mean, these deals can sometimes be a little sensitive or tender, and we don't overexpose information,
Sure.
but we make sure that people are properly informed, you know, especially when it comes to subject twos, or, you know, I'm subject twos that also might involve where the person taking over subject two is assigning it, or I'm trying to think of, I know that we did one.
I've done a few. I don't like sub twos.
Yeah.
I do them occasionally, but like usually for short-term stuff. But
Subject twos are a great way to get in. I mean, it's a great vehicle as an investor to acquire a property without having to go through a loan process. But I think it's important to have an exit strategy. Hey, you know, after 12 months, and this is where making a good contact with a lender, they can help teach you 6 months, 12 months being seasoned on a property. Now I can do a refinance rather than acquisition. That could open up a whole world, because now my requirements for cash to close could be completely different. Now I could maybe refinance the debt in my name, not have to bring any money to closing. Whereas if it's an acquisition, I'm buying the property, lenders generally, it doesn't matter what the value is, they're never going to loan you 100%. Even if you have $1 million property that you're buying for $100,000, no conventional bank will loan you $100,000. They'll say, great, we'll loan you 80%. You still have to come to the table with $20,000. And then that makes no sense, because that's $1 million property. Well, now let's say you get somebody to take it over. Let's say you were lucky enough to find that deal, and you take over somebody's mortgage for $100,000 and you hold it for 12 months. Now I can go to a bank and I can refinance based on the value. I could actually go refinance at 80% of the $1 million. I could go get a loan for $800,000, pay off the 100, put, you know, money back in my pocket. So again, all of these are tools, are good tools, but know how to use them. Know what you're getting into, and they, you know, you've talked about them. So hopefully from all this, and you know, like you said, it implies like just having the understanding of the issues that come up.
Yeah.
But we're not opposed to doing double closings. We know how to treat assignments and all these other issues that come up. And some firms just flat out won't do them, or they're just not experienced in doing them, and so they potentially screw them up.
Yeah, exactly. So having a good asset on your team, a good closing attorney or title company, obviously in Georgia we're an attorney state, but in other states they're just title company states. In essence, you guys are a title company, right?
Absolutely.
You're just, in Georgia, an attorney is required to do the closing, right? Yeah. So yeah, having that asset on your team is absolutely critical to being a successful investor, because if you don't, you're going to be, pushing a ball uphill, right? So thanks again for checking out this video. I'm Brad with probatehouseguy.com. I know this video is long and I really apologize, but there's a lot of good information in here. So appreciate your time, Josh. And if you're interested in working together, like I said, I specialize in probate and inheritance deals. I've been doing that for a number of years. So please reach out to me on my website, probatehouseguy.com. And I hope you guys have a nice day. Thank you.